So session 3 in this series is entitled Bromance. Bromance, enjoying emotionally healthy friendships with the same gender. I've chosen the title Bromance because the definition of the word really encapsulates this idea that we want to talk about this morning. Having emotionally healthy and intimate relationships with people of the same gender. So Wikipedia is going to define bromance like this: a close, affectionate, non-sexual relationship between two men. The female equivalent of bromance is womance. Bromance or womance is characterized by a high level of physical and emotional intimacy. This is beyond an acquaintance or even a casual friend. This is like your best friend. This is the person you do life with. This is your ride or die friend who you have bromance or womance with. Bromance is a recurring and profound theme in the Bible. Now, you won't find that word in the Bible, and you won't find the word Trinity in the Bible. You won't find the word Bible in the Bible. But we can see this theme in the Bible. Let me point it out for you. 7 bromances or womances in the Bible. Number 1, Abraham and Lot. This was an uncle and a nephew. Lot's dad died, and his uncle Abraham took him on as a nephew and as a son. Abraham was Lot's protector. They were close. They traveled from Ur to Canaan together. And you know what? Lot made a lot of bad decisions, but Abraham stuck by his nephew. And Lot even got himself kidnapped by some people from Sodom. And I love this. Abraham got 318 of his bloodline together. He got his bloodline together, 318 men together to go after his nephew, Lot, to ambush his kidnappers and rescue his nephew. That's what you call a foxhole friend. And we're going to talk a lot about that in a moment. But Abraham was a foxhole friend to his nephew, Lot. Number 2, Ruth and Naomi. Ruth became really close friends with her much older mother-in-law, and they helped each other succeed all throughout their lives. They wouldn't leave each other's side. Then you have Job and his friends. Now, when Job faced his toughest times, his friends were there with him. Now, his friends almost always get a bad rap because they gave him terrible advice most of the time, but they were there with him. They didn't leave Job. They stuck it out. They comforted him when he was sick. What about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? These were 4 Jewish friends from Jerusalem who found themselves exiled in Babylon because of other people's really bad decisions. But while they were exiled in Babylon, these 4 close friends, they encouraged each other to stay faithful to God. They built each other up in the faith. Then we have in the New Testament Paul and Barnabas. These guys had bromance. Barnabas vouched for Paul when the Jerusalem church was skeptical of his conversion. Remember, Paul, formerly known as Saul, was a fierce persecutor of Christians, but he had an experience, an encounter with the living God, and it changed him forever. Now, rightly so, the Jerusalem church was skeptical, but Paul had a friend named Barnabas who stuck his neck out and said, you know what? He's the real deal. He's had a real encounter with God. Barnabas was an encouragement to Paul when he was on his missionary journeys. And these guys weren't all sunshine and rainbows. They had a really intense disagreement about who was qualified to minister on these missionary journeys. And so they parted company for a while, but eventually they were reconciled, because they were true friends. They had true bromance. Then probably the most celebrated bromance in all the Bible is between Jonathan and David. Jonathan, the son of the first king of Israel, King Saul, and not to be confused with the Saul I just talked about, and David, the second king of Israel. The friendship between David and Jonathan is celebrated as the most amazing bromance in the Bible. Jonathan loved David as his own soul, the Bible says. We often think about our spouse as our soulmate, but Jonathan and David were soulmates. They loved each other with their own souls. And again, this was not a sexual relationship. This was not a homosexual relationship. This was two men who loved each other from the deepest parts of their being. They were loyal to each other, even unto death. They risked their lives for each other. This bromance is a witness to the selfless love and loyalty that God intended for friendships with the same gender. We're going to dive into this story a bit more later on in this series, but when you read this story and you see how these two guys loved each other, how they were loyal to each other, you can see the kind of friendship that God intended for each of us to have with people and members of the same gender. And then finally, Jesus and Lazarus. Even Jesus had bromance. The friendship between Jesus and Lazarus expressed divine love intertwined with human emotion. Remember, all relationships are highly emotional. Even the relationships Jesus had with people on the earth were emotional. We can see that in the relationship between Jesus and Lazarus. You probably know the shortest verse in the Bible, right? Jesus wept. Would you know what he was crying about? He was crying about the death of his best friend, his really dear friend, Lazarus. See, when Lazarus got sick, his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent for Jesus. And Jesus delayed coming because he knew that Lazarus would die, but God would be glorified through the miracle of his resurrection. But when Jesus got there, the Bible says that he cried. Even though he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, Jesus still cried because his friend had died. Jesus shows us that divine love and emotion go together and that we can have deep compassion for our friends. As Pastor Joel just said, real men cry. There's no more real man in all of human history than Jesus. And he cried over the death of his friend.